Teenage years are a time when we see increases in mental health problems like anxiety and depression, but it's also a time when we see a lot of changes that may provide a basis for really positive development. And I'm interested in which children take which pathway in their development and what factors predict which pathways they're going to take.
There are various things that can impact or put adolescents at risk for experiencing things like depression or anxiety. Some of those things might be, genetic predispositions or things that come from the individual themselves. But there's also a lot of research that really looks at how social environment and negative experiences in the peer group can make adolescents particularly sensitive to their social environment and put them at risk for things like depression or anxiety or other mental health problems.
During the teenage years, we see all the physical changes associated with puberty. There's significant reorganization in the brain, changes in the dynamics in parent-child relationships. And then, of course, we see an increasing value placed on being a part of the peer group and being evaluated positively by peers.
Humans have this natural need to kind of want to belong. But teenagers in particular, we know compared to like children or adults or older adults are particularly sensitive to social cues and are particularly tuned into how much they're included in groups. In this study in particular, we were interested to see where do those belonging needs or wanting to fit in or being influenced by others, where does that kind of originate from? The research really focused on how did things like being bullied or being friendless or having these broad experiences that we think of as peer adversity, do those types of experiences make youth even more influenced by peers or wanting to fit in more or wanting to kind of belong in those social groups more? During this task, essentially, girls are brought into the laboratory and they're told that they're going to be playing a game with two other participants. And it's quite simple. They're just told that you can toss the ball to whoever you want. And so there's 2 rounds of cyberball. In the first round, they are throwing the ball equally. So everybody's kind of included at the same rate. And then in the second round, the girls are excluded. So for reasons unbeknownst to them, the 2 other players just throw the ball to each other. They're not throwing the ball to them at all. And so this kind of simulates being excluded. Generally speaking, we found that overall experiences of peer adversity were related to, as we kind of predicted, a strengthening in these types of needs to belong or these needs for approval, or how much self-worth is impacted by peer approval or disapproval.
What we found is that when chronically victimized girls were being excluded during this game of cyberball, they actually showed more activation in regions of the brain that are involved in processing emotions and kind of salient social cues in the environment. So essentially, their brains were noting and more tuned into this exclusion. And we also know that when people show more activation in these regions of the brain during cyberball, these chronically victimized girls were more likely to be anxious and depressed. So these brain activation patterns could kind of give us a window onto perhaps why these girls were more prone to anxiety and depression.
So they might become more tuned into how are they belonging in the group, or something that we were particularly concerned about is how do youth determine their own self-worth, and is that self-worth impacted by how their peers are thinking about them?
So when children experience adversity, they seem to be less able to generate effective responses to later stress. They don't develop as effective coping mechanisms. Although we would like to be able to reduce all those types of adverse circumstances, it's not necessarily a realistic goal. And so what we can do is identify kind of the intermediate step. What is going on when kids have these experiences that maybe we can actually change and work with kids to prevent future problems.
Instead of, focusing just on reducing depression or anxiety or things like that, we can focus on these interpersonal needs as a kind of a beginning step. So if we can intervene on how much youth determine their self-worth based on what others think of them, and perhaps maybe guide them to engage in determining their self-worth based on personal characteristics instead of what other people think of them, we think that can ultimately improve emotional well-being for teenagers, especially teenage girls.